Hey, welcome back to Unschooled Theology. I am one of your hosts, Derick. With me is Evan. Good day, sir.
Good day to you, sir.
All right, so we are recording this a bit out of order. We're recording this, I don't know, 6 months in the future of when we recorded the episode you
Yeah,
just previously saw. So we're
which
wibbly
which we
wobbly.
always do. We always are a little bit
We
way in
are
advance
always
of schedule.
ahead,
This
but
one
yeah,
is we are going through Genesis 2 right now. We're in
yes,
the middle of end
yep,
of Genesis 2 right now, and we are going to be inserting this one. That's the
yes.
benefit of, I guess, working ahead.
Back, yes, right. It gives us a chance to insert back into Genesis 1. So if the background looks different,
It
if
will.
we've aged,
Yeah,
since the
significantly.
previous episode, significantly.
It's been a
uh
long 6 months.
yeah, exactly. Exactly, it's been a while. So we are coming back to this particular point because I had some thoughts on what we discussed here in the previous episode that I wanted to flesh out a little further, because I've had some discussions and yeah, just some experiences that I think would help us understand one of the ideas we talked about a little bit better. So, in the episode before this one, we discussed the idea of the image of God, right? God says, "Let us create man in our image." And we talked about that relating to the idea that we aren't necessarily individually the image of God, but the idea being that like humanity as a whole is meant to sort of act as the image of God within creation. Um, is that ringing a bell for you? Obviously, for
Yeah,
listeners,
yeah.
it'll be
They
the
just
previous
got it.
episode. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. But for you, yeah, it's jump back.
I remember it.
So recently, I have had some discussions and read a variety of things that have a more Eastern influence, let's say,
Mhm.
philosophically, religiously, these things. And I operate personally under the premise that uh, other religious systems or belief systems or these ideas that have sort of stood the test of time, there are elements of truth there, right?
Mhm.
The idea being that no lie can last very long on its own, right? The best lies always contain a bit of truth,
Mhm.
which, speaking of Genesis 2, we'll actually see that in Genesis 3 when we get to the serpent. So, that's 60 odd episodes in the future for the rest of you.
Right.
But for us, it's actually just a few minutes from now.
Only 40.
Um, yeah, exactly. So when I look at other religious systems or other philosophical systems, belief systems, ways of approaching the world, one of the things I ask, because I do believe that Christianity holds all the truth, if you will. One of the things I ask is, what is the truth that these systems of thought are emphasizing that we are not necessarily emphasizing in Christianity, and that is perhaps causing people to be more drawn to some of these other ways of thinking. It's the kind
Yeah.
of thing where it's like, well, they would find that same thing in Christianity, but that's like it's just their personal thing, their personal God-shaped hole or whatnot. And
Mhm.
we as Christians, particularly in the West, have not done a great job of emphasizing this or that thing, and that has sort of pushed people in these other directions.
Mhm.
Like I said, even though it's in Christianity, it's just not emphasized. So one of the things that's interesting about
So wait, can I just
oh,
give a small insertion here? Maybe
no,
an
yeah, please.
example.
Yeah.
I think a decent example of this is people tend to look at Buddhism, and one of the takeaways you hear from anybody, ask anyone who has small exposure to Buddhism, they'll
Mhm.
say one of the most profound things that it elaborates on is that life is suffering.
Yes.
And it's kind of like, well, of course. I mean, the Christianity tells that in a story.
Yeah.
I mean, Christianity represents that in that the perfection of humanity, Christ, is crucified.
Yeah. In
Yes,
Christianity, it's
life
so
is
ingrained.
suffering.
Right. It's so ingrained into the story that it's
it's
Doesn't
not
feel like a
expressed
revelation.
explicitly. Well, yeah, but it's never said
Right.
to somebody life is suffering.
Right.
It's said,
Yeah.
it's just pointed at. It's just, you go into a church and you see a cross and it's like, well, what does a cross represent? It represents this fundamental suffering
Mhm.
that is inherent in existence. And so I think that might be an example you might be hitting at. Why did someone have to go to Buddhism and exit Western culture, which is soaked in Christianity, and go look at there and say, oh, look at this profound thing they discovered, life is suffering? It's like, yeah, this was something that Christianity had the whole time too.
Well, the Protestant work
but in
ethic
some way
keeps
we
it
didn't
together.
look at that. It does, absolutely, it does. I think it's a fair then to look at it as the church then say, how did we let somebody miss that? Right. Like, how did we, what in the way that we're looking at it and not understanding that? Why are they not getting that? And why did they have to get that from somewhere else? Right. So just as an example of maybe what you're talking about, of a major tenet of another faith, and people somehow missing that that's a major tenet of inside Christianity as well, you know? Yeah. I mean, maybe it's that we emphasize redemption too much, that there is a clear path to redemption, and that's all we talk about, because my goodness, isn't that great news? But you know, we don't start with that premise of, look, their life is suffering.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, that's a powerful idea, because before someone can even really grasp, I think, the idea of redemption at times, like hurting people need to know that it's real. They're hurt, you know?
Yeah.
And that's something that as Christians, I don't think we do a good enough job of always acknowledging that, you know? Yeah. Your hurt is real. And that is something people need, that validation, you know, first. Yeah. So, okay. So with that in mind, one of the things that emerges in Eastern philosophy is this idea of almost of humans being God. I don't know if you've heard that, right? This idea that, well, we all are God, right? Mm-hmm. This is a phrase that can be used at times. Mm-hmm. Or we can have the mind of God. We can know the mind of God, all of these things. Yeah. And I think that is an overstatement. All right. But the thing that they're reacting to is something real. Mm-hmm. And I think that we find the beginnings of that right here when we see this idea of humanity being the image of God. Yeah. In other words, there's something special about humanity that happens not just at an individual level, but at a very broad collective level. Mm-hmm. Like there is, I think what this verse tells us is that there is some sort of like macroorganism effect to humanity as a whole, right? And I think that perhaps some of these Eastern religions, philosophies, and so on have done a better job of sort of tapping into that reality. They've done a better job of sort of accessing the idea that there's a collective thing going on here too, you know, that all humanity is one thing. Now they go too far when they say it's God. We all are God, but collectively all together, we are the image of God, which is not, you know, I mean, it's a big step, but also not that big a step, right? It's like, no, yeah, we are meant to be what God would be within the constraints of this system that we inhabit, right? And so there's a connection there that it's like, well, that's useful. And so to make this a little easier for perhaps the Christian to understand what I'm saying, we see a smaller version of this when we talk about the idea of the church, right? It is pretty well understood that there's something new that is birthed out of the collective nature of Christianity, that we all might individually be Christians, but collectively we make up the church. And that is an organism of its own. We call it the bride of Christ. You know, it's a new thing that emerges, a new macroorganism. And And we as Christians access this thing regularly through different practices, coming together, in corporate groups to worship, or the sacraments are a way we do it. No one, we would all look a little weird at someone if they said, oh yeah, I had the Lord's Supper. I do it at home, on my own, in my bedroom, every Sunday. We'd all look at you and say, yeah, that's not really it, right? There's something about the collective nature of it. And we see this too. Christians get this sense in songs, right? I was thinking about this the other day at church, and they did How Great Thou Art. And I honestly, a lot of songs, I don't sort of feel this connected thing, when we sing the songs, because a lot of music doesn't connect with me that way. But that song sure does. I have a hard time ever hearing that song and not feeling like, no, there's something bigger going on right now as we are all collectively singing How Great Thou Art. And it's a powerful moment, a powerful idea. And so that is a little bit of this sort of recognition of there being something greater, this macroorganism that is produced out of us all as individuals, right? And I think there is something even greater beyond that, right? All of humanity as a whole meant to be this image of God idea. And it's something that I think as Christians, we should probably start to just try and recognize that that's there, that exists. There is this kind of macroorganism of all humanity, right? And there's a lot of ways you could go with this idea further, even, and look at, you could look at the church and even say, well, through the church, the whole macroorganism is going to be purified. It's going to be cleaned up, right? Or we're some type of immune system, reaction within that whole macroorganism. That's one way, I guess, of seeing what the church is inside of that greater thing that is meant to be the image of God. Well, the image of God is sick right now. Humanity as a whole is sick. It's not fulfilling that thing. But through the church and through obviously Christ, with the church, that thing can be fixed. It can be healed. It can be purified. It can be made to be whole and fulfill that role again at some point.
Yeah. I think that the thing that was revolutionary, or that feels revolutionary, is that salvation is boiled down to an individual in Christianity.
Right.
And it's very possible that when you do that, that creates a dissonance for people if you're going to talk about humanity as being the image of God, broadly speaking.
Right.
Right. Because it's boiled down to the individual level. Yep. And even more so, that's also nailed in by the Reformation, because they try to boil it down to the individual level. And that causes massive changes in society that go beyond just the church and that go beyond just Christianity. Is that the perspective shift happens in the West of looking at people through an individual lens rather than through a collective lens. But it misses that there is somehow something still collective to us.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not like that's wrong. It's just overemphasized. It's like it's gone a little too far now in that direction. And thus we're missing and not doing a great job of acknowledging the fact that other people are recognizing the fact that all humanity together equals something, right? There is this macroorganism that is humanity. And if we could do a better job of saying, no, you're absolutely right, that is a real thing, and it's wonderful that you've come to recognize that and see that and acknowledge that. However, that thing it's sick at the moment, it's been made ill by sin. And you can help be, part of that which is sort of restored, I guess, to that original design or what that thing is supposed to be. But yeah, just sort of recognizing that for some people, and I guess apparently particularly in the East at the moment, that idea of sort of the collective thing that humanity together produces is vitally important, and something that as you point out, and especially Western Protestantism, we've kind of forgotten it, or just don't really talk about it, or don't care, or something, right? We don't
not understood that we can hold both in equal,
right,
that we can
right.
hold both in our hands at the same time.
Yeah.
That by saying there is something more significant than, by saying that there is something to a collective body, that we're not rejecting the validity of the individual,
right,
and the
exactly.
salvation on an individual basis. I mean, we've talked about this, or we've suggested this before. I don't know if we have at this point in our conversations, considering where we're going to insert this, but we have talked about this.
Yeah.
We'll rehash it just briefly if we need to, but that Protestantism is a reaction. Yes. Protestantism is a reaction to something, and it's a reaction.
Comes from
protest, exactly. And the ideas that it was reacting to, one of the fundamental ones was this requirement of a collective body in order to be saved. And that's a part of it, because the church structured itself in a very poor way by now allowing excommunication to say, we ripped you of salvation when we excommunicated you.
Right.
So you're dependent then on a body for your of people for your salvation, as opposed to being on the individual level. And that is incorrect. But that doesn't mean that if you're going to say that the individual determines their salvation, then there's not some value to a body. And there's not something that is profound in it. And that may be even more significant than the individual, even though an individual might determine their salvation.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
That's what ends up happening is you swing your pendulum too far. And that's probably a big issue with Protestantism, especially at the moment.
Right. So, so that's just one of the implications of this idea of the sort of the plural nature of being the image of God. The idea that it's not just us individually, being the image of God in creation. We're limited in capacity. There's only so much we can do, but all of us together being the image of God within creation. So this is just one of the implications of that idea that may be useful in terms of speaking to people from, those kinds of backgrounds, even though a lot of us, especially here where I am in the Midwest, we don't run into people with those kinds of backgrounds and thoughts very much, but they are out there. You will meet them, I'm sure, in time. And,
we have more out here in Colorado.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. Yeah. But it's good to have language that connects with what they see and feel, right? Because a lot of people will see and feel things a little bit differently than you do, but there's a way to talk to them. Because I think all answers are found in Christ, and so that answer can be found in Christianity. So all right, with that we'll wrap up. Be sure to like, subscribe, shoot us a email, unschooltheology@protonmail.com, join our mailing list, all those things. And I don't remember what's actually coming up in the next episode, since we inserted this one in the stream in the middle, so
it'll be a good one though.
Enjoy whatever that is. Yeah. All right. See you next time.